Okay, awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and start by reading out the learning goals. Gonna call on some people to do that for me. Richard, would you mind reading the first goal?
Yeah, I got you. I'm sorry. Chewing.
Fine.
Define the 4-page layout types and explain benefits and drawbacks of each.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, there are actually 4 types of page layouts. So far, we've pretty much been building static layouts, but we'll get to explore those different ones. And then the second learning goal, Ethan.
Apply media queries and explain how they provide the behavior they do.
Nice, nice. Thank you. Awesome. I want to go ahead and take some volunteers first. Go ahead and put this in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand. What is something you already know about responsive design? I know this is the first lesson, but we've kind of like snuck it in a little bit so far. What do we know about responsive design already? Yeah, it moves with the browser sizes, right? Percentages, view height, view width, that can kind of help us out. Perfect. We can use it in CSS. That kind of helps us define our screen sizes. We're going to be using these media queries to define layout at certain sizes. Perfect. It's adaptable. Pixels are not always great at responsive design. We're going to want to be looking at percentages, view height, view width. Another one is ems and rems. There's all kind of sorts of different units of measurement that are good for responsiveness. Sometimes they are. Sometimes pixels are great, and we're going to talk about that. Yeah, checking out different phone types, that can be super useful. Nice. All right, so you know some things about responsive design. Couple facts for you. In 2019, 53% of web traffic worldwide is generated by mobile devices. This seems kind of low to me. I would want to do some research to get something a little bit more recent. I assume it grew. I assume it grew a lot. Our products live online, so as developers, it's our responsibility to make sure that a user can access our products, right? We've talked about accessibility a little bit, right? Talking about how we want to make sure that our apps are accessible to a wide range of users. Responsive design fits into that a little bit, right? If a user only has access to a cell phone and not a desktop computer, we want to make sure that our sites still work for them, right? Just as important. So in order to get this, we are going to explore a couple different ways to lay out our pages. And there's kind of different reasons to do these individual layouts. So what I want to do is start us out in breakout rooms. We're going to explore this site here. Okay. Sometimes you're going to want to do a hard refresh if it doesn't load properly. It should look like this. We're using the Wayback Machine because this is an older site. So we're going back to an older version of it, but it should work. What I want you to do in your breakout rooms is it's going to be most helpful to go ahead and inspect this because you're going to want to pay attention to how the page changes when you're moving this, right? Notice those kind of zones where we're going from maybe this is like a tablet size down to mobile, sort of play around with this view and notice the different layouts. You're going to see this drop down here to kind of select the different ones, and you can sort of note the differences here. Play around with this view too to check out the mobile, just sort of note the differences between these 4 layouts. There's some more information here. And then if you still have time left, go ahead and talk about these questions together. Think about some sites that you go to frequently. Think about how that site kind of changes from mobile to desktop, specifically navigation. This is where you're going to see probably the biggest change going from mobile to desktop. Okay. So a bunch of things. I'm going to give you probably about 7-8 minutes, and then we'll come back in and talk about these different page layouts and which ones you're going to be using. Any questions about that? All right, cool. Hey, Stevie.
Sorry, I'm like trying to do so many things at one time. Okay, yeah. Bye, thank you.
Bye. All right, let's go ahead and talk about these different layouts. Sort of starting with static. What did we notice about this one? Does anyone like static? Cuts off the page on a smaller screen.
My bank does.
Your bank does. Nice. Yeah, it doesn't really adjust, right? It kind of just, I don't know, looks like it's zooming in. Can we think of a reason for ever having a static site like this?
I imagine if you have images that need to be viewed at a specific size and you don't want them to be changing in their size.
Maybe. What would happen on mobile though? Like
You just have to scroll around, I guess.
maybe. Maybe. Yeah. If you ever see a site that has a horizontal scroll and it's not on purpose, it's not like a design element, it's because an element is too big. Usually something we don't want. Grace.
I was just kind of thinking of those sites that you normally see for like either astronomy classes or like what's inside of a cell, and then you can like just keep zooming into something. So you'd probably have like a static size so that people can actually zoom into different parts of the screen.
Okay.
That's like the only example I can think of.
I think that makes sense. So I do have one example, but it's very niche. I had to make a site that was only ever going to be viewed on one computer. It was for some kind of trade show where they had the site up and were showing it to customers or something. And there was no way for anybody to access the site themselves. So we had total control over the screen size, right? And in that case, you probably don't want to waste your time building out mobile styles because you don't need to. But this is going to be super rare. We're probably going to not really focus on static layouts. All right, so looking at these other ones, we have responsive. Okay, so doing this one, we can kind of see we have this movement occurring, right? We have this kind of shrinking and growing. Yeah, and then once we go full screen, it completely stretches, right? So our responsive styles, they're filling the page, but they're kind of shrinking down and moving a little bit, okay? Any thoughts or opinions on this responsive design here? Anyone like this one the best? Rana.
More a question. I don't know if I prefer this one over, I think adaptive was the other one I liked, but
Mhm.
how does it know? So that title bar on the right side, that blue box, how does it know to move that underneath everything as opposed to just kind of like squeezing it on top of? I don't know. I'm just like, how does it decide the hierarchy of when you are making it smaller, what goes where?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm gonna do this really slow so we can watch it change. Shrink, shrink, shrink. Okay. All right, so it reaches a certain point, okay? And then it just jumps down to the bottom. We scroll and we see this all the way down here. So we could certainly inspect this and kind of see what the code was. But the way that I would probably do this is with the Flexbox order property. You can do some creative mixing of turning things from rows into columns, changing the order of your elements. It's a super fun one. It's called order in Flexbox. And I'm sure Grid has something similar as well. What do you think, Allie?
I was just gonna say that I like this one the best because it seemed
Yeah.
like the only one that stretched. Like I had it on my big monitor and it was the only one that stretched to the full width of my screen, whereas I think the other ones like stopped at a certain
Yeah.
width. So I liked
You're right.
responsive.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes we want it to stretch, right? Sometimes that's our design goal, is to stretch it all the way out. Maybe we don't. Maybe we have a site where we know people are going to view it on massive screens and we want some control over cutting it off. So it really just depends on what your goal is. So we have liquid next. Okay, this one, you can see the boxes are shrinking a little bit. But we don't ever really have that snap of a media query, right? What I'm referring to is when we hit a certain breakpoint and everything changes, right? We hit a certain width and that blue box jumped to the bottom or something else changed on the page. This one, things are moving. It's not like static, but we can see we run into problems when we get to the smallest mobile size, right? We get that classic like, CSS, your text is escaping the box. Typically not what we want. So yeah, liquid has some limitations. And then I think the final one was adaptive, very similar to responsive, but we sort of cut it off at the end there. Okay, we also have kind of not really handling those in-between states, right? We don't really see the boxes shrinking. We just see them sort of pop at that breakpoint, right? Which can be a little jarring if we're doing this, but in all reality, hopefully our users are not doing this, right? Hopefully they're not taking your sites and going like, well, I want to see how responsive it is. They're either pulling up their phone or pulling up their computer. So yeah, different layouts. Okay, cool. Any final thoughts on these 4 different layout types? Okay, cool. Anyone want to share any sites that you've kind of noticed some cool responsiveness? I know Rana put one in the chat. Anybody else have any that's, you think does a really good job of that responsive design? I just want to pull up this one. Whoa. I like this little hint at the top. Try resizing your browser. Whoa. This is cool. Yeah, this is super cool. Definitely shows you how powerful media queries can be. Like, this is completely changing the whole site. Very nice. Thank you for sharing that. All right. So we'll go ahead and go back to the lesson. Here's a good kind of cheat sheet to remember those 4-page layouts. I'll be honest with you, kind of the language that you will hear mostly in the industry is going to be a little less specific than this. You'll usually just hear like, this site is responsive or this site is not responsive, not really having those specifics of the 4 different page layouts. You may hear static, but it's either you did some responsive design or you didn't. Great. So next we are going to get into media queries and breakpoints. This is kind of how we specify what we want to happen at a certain width of our screen, right? They're kind of like conditional logic, right? Where we're going to be writing these checks to see, hey, if your width is currently whatever pixels, whatever ems, we're going to change the styles to be something different, okay? So our media queries are going to live in our CSS. And then when you write a series of media queries, you are creating a very basic algorithm. They control at what screen size specific styles will be applied. They will usually write these at the bottom of the CSS file that they live in. If you do choose to use Sass, they can look a little bit different. Sass allows us to nest our media queries, but they work pretty much the same way. It's just where you're storing them. So there are also several different media types. We usually are going to specify screen, but you can also designate specific styles for print. So if you are printing out your web page, you can have a style sheet for that. I had to make one once. It was super weird. You can also do them specific for the screen reader, which I don't know entirely what that looks like. So we're going to focus on screen because this is intended for our computer screens. We have our vocab word of breakpoints, which is going to refer to the widths the media queries reference. When the media query is true, so when the screen size matches what is specified, the styles are going to be applied, okay? It may seem natural to set breakpoints for certain devices. However, it's actually best practice to choose a breakpoint when the layout of content needs to change, okay? We're going to talk about what that looks like. All right, so we have our media queries here. These are just some examples, just so you can see what this looks like. It's going to look a little bit different in practice, okay? So looking here, we are using an @ rule, which is similar to what you see in Sass. We are specifying that these styles are for screen. I believe if you leave this out, the browser will just guess for you, but it's best practice to specify that these are for the screen. And then you're kind of passing in an argument. This is always going to be min width or max width, okay? You can give any numerical value here. In this example, we are using ems. You often will see pixels specified as well, okay? All right, so this is our media query, okay? What questions do we have about this so far? Just looking at a media query. Richard.
So we gotta do, I'm just making sure I'm reading this right. So you specify media and you tell it specifically you want to do it for a screen. You want to do it for something else, then it changes from screen to whatever else you want to change it to, right?
Yeah, like print or Phil's right. You could also do portrait versus landscape layout.
Okay, for sure. And then you do, then you add the, it always needs the and then the parentheses. So you could determine which one's minimum, which one's max.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, nice. Daniel.
Yeah, just to make sure I'm understanding what I'm looking at. So the top one is saying that if it's 55 EM or larger, the background is going to be magenta. And the bottom one's saying if it's 40 EM or smaller, the background's going to be teal, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And so in between is currently undefined, right?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We're going to pull this up in the code pen and see how this is interesting to get an initial understanding of media queries, but maybe is not what we're going to want in practice. Yeah. Because exactly like you said, what about when these conditions, what about outside of these conditions? We don't know what color it's going to be. Yeah. Chets.
This is just a question about M's. I've used them before without really knowing much about them. When is it a good situation to use them?
Yeah, M's are weird. So M's will determine their sizing based upon their parent. Okay, so if you're using M's for a font size, for example, right? Maybe the body font size is set to 12 pixels, right? And you use one M for your font size, it's going to be 12 pixels. If you use two M's, it's going to be 24, right? So there's a lot more math involved, but it's basically relative to its parent container, which means it's going to scale a little bit better. So if we have a parent wrapper box somehow that's like changing, right? Our font size is going to scale to it if we use M's, okay? And I can post a resource about it because it's hard for me to keep track too. Another one is rems. They work very similarly, but they kind of point to the body font size, right? M's is going to point to its most direct parent to learn how to scale. Rems are going to point to the body to sort of learn how to scale. Okay, and it's super weird that we're using them here for breakpoints. Okay, I actually did look this up. I found an article on why or why not we would want to use M's for breakpoints. I'll put this in the chat too. Okay. Whoa. All right. Just to kind of summarize this article for you, developers are kind of debating, like, do we want to use M's or pixels for our breakpoints? The reason why some developers would want to use an M is those breakpoints are going to be applied sooner. So whenever those breakpoints they're reached, that font is going to scale more. So basically, it gives you a little bit more scaling happening. I personally like to use pixels because I think they're easier to understand. So if you're interested in using M's for your breakpoints, definitely check out this article to hear about some of the benefits. I think using pixels is perfectly fine in this situation. Sorry if that was a little confusing. There's a lot going on with these different font sizes. Okay, more questions. Rana.
The notes mentioned to have the media queries at the bottom of our CSS page, but I usually have like hover events or hidden property kind of things at the bottom of the page. Does it matter if it comes before those? Does it need to be the absolute last thing? Does it matter at all?
Yeah, I don't think it should matter. Yeah. Usually we want to have the media queries at the bottom just to make sure that they actually get applied, right? Thinking about the whole chain of cascades, if maybe our regular styles were a little bit more specific than our media query styles for some reason, we would have trouble getting them to apply. So you still want to have them at the bottom. Hover styles could maybe be above them. But yeah, I don't think you should run into too many issues with that. Christine.
That was extremely close to my question.
Nice.
So yeah, so because on that article that you just posted, I scrolled a little bit down, and it has the media within like a specific style. So you're saying like put hover above the media part in like that. I am struggling so hard to say my question.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think it matters a ton, but I would probably put the hover first
and then
before the media query.
Yeah, and then as far as file structure, do you suggest, like, does this go on the base like app CSS document?
Depends. Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay.
So this example here is showing a Sass syntax, right? Where we have our banner element and we've actually nested the media query inside, as you would do with the hover too, right? If we weren't using Sass, it would pretty much look the same-ish. We'd just be pulling that media query out and specifying banner. But we're going to see a bunch of examples. I'll talk about how this looks in React as well. But honestly, it's pretty much the same as in vanilla JavaScript. All right. Let's take a POM. Let's take 6 minutes. Then I want to actually pull up this example and show you what's happening and why this is not the ideal way to write media queries. Okay, let's come back at 46. Okay, let's just kind of start with talking through what this media query is doing again. Okay, so the first example, we have set a breakpoint. Okay, that breakpoint being the min width that we defined. Okay, and we set this for 55 ems, which is about 900 pixels and larger. Okay, so remember that min width is used to define styles at a certain breakpoint and larger. Okay, so we're saying once you hit that minimum width of 55 ems, you're going to apply these styles no matter how big the screen gets. Okay. Our second breakpoint, it has it set for 40 ems, so 700 pixels and smaller. Okay, so this one is going to say, all right, we are going to immediately apply these styles. We're going to stop once we hit 40 ems. Okay. So something Daniel pointed out is we have that whole 200 pixel section where we don't have anything defined, right? Looking at this 900 and 700, what is going to happen in those in-between times? Okay. All right, so I want to pull up this code pen so we can look at it here. Okay. Go ahead and inspect it. Try to dig through all of this code pen stuff and actually find the body. No, that's not it. Maybe I can't because it's in an iframe. Okay, I'm not going to struggle through all that. All right, so we can see that we have a screen size set. I want to just start at mobile, okay? So we are at this very small screen size. We have applied the teal style, okay? Right, remember this is going to be our, we're starting off small. We're going to end these styles once we hit 40 ems, okay? So we're applying that one. We're gonna keep growing it. Okay, we're gonna keep holding on to those styles. Okay, keep going. All right, we hit a point where there are no styles defined for what should happen, right? This one doesn't apply, that one doesn't apply. So we basically have no color set on the body, right? We keep going, we're gonna hit our other breakpoint. Got to get all the way up to 55 Ms. And then we get magenta, okay? We keep growing, it's just gonna stay magenta, all right? So I find this super confusing, right? Thinking about how to sort of trace my styles, have something predictable, always have a style being applied, right? This is probably not the way that I would do this, okay? Does anybody have any thoughts as to what would be a better way to write this code? Thinking about how we don't want any in-between stages, right? We either want to be magenta or we want to be teal. What do you think, Kai?
Would you just do like one or the other and then have like a default value, I guess?
Ooh,
So just skip the first media query. I mean, the only thing is you wouldn't have the magenta. So you'd have to hard code body, background, magenta, and then have the media query.
So probably something just like I
Yeah.
copied and pasted that, but all right, let's inspect it. Okay, so just if I did that too quickly, what Kai suggested is we just had body kind of like normal out here. We set it to be magenta, and then we added our media query. Okay. Just want to view everything, okay? So we have our teal, right? Because that was our smallest media query here. We're gonna keep growing, okay? And then we hit magenta, okay? There was no sort of in-between stage of where it was like, I don't know what to be, right? Okay, so I like this. Any other thoughts? What else could we do to make this different? Allie?
Would you just want to change your breakpoints to make sure they're like starting at the same value, so you just don't have the in between?
You could, yeah. Let me backtrack a little bit. So do you mean something like this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's try this. I'm not logged in, so hopefully it applies because I know it's not going to save. All right, so this time we set the min width 40 to be magenta and the max width 40 to be teal. Okay, we'll see what happens. Actually, I'm going to change this to pixels. It's just going to be easier. Sorry. So we know exactly when this change happens. Okay, starting at the bottom, we've got our teal. We're going to get up to 900. You can also type it in here, but you know, the suspense. Oh. Interesting. Did it not happen? Looks like it didn't really hit at 900. It's kind of weird. I wonder if this is because it's in CodePen. It's like not computing the size exactly. I'm not totally sure. It should. Yeah, it's still magenta. Okay. Yeah, maybe it didn't save. I don't know. It's not really hitting until we get to 1,000. All right, I'll log in. I'll log in so we can make this work. Okay, all right, so we'll change this to 900 pixels, 100 pixels, max width, okay. save it, and let's see if this changes things for us. I don't know. So typically what you will see here is when you have the same number defined for your min and max width, what happens when you hit 900 exactly, right? We run into this kind of logic issue where it's like, we have it set for both 900 for both instances. So there's a 1 pixel situation where no styles will be applied. I apologize, we can't see that on the screen, but that is typically what happens. We have a 1 pixel situation where it doesn't know. So if you do it this way, you're often gonna have to do something weird where you bump it down by 1. Just one of those quirks. Yeah. But this is something we could do. Yeah. Any other ideas? Gabby.
I don't have an idea, but I have a question.
Okay.
So I remember working with media queries once upon a time, and I remember doing research, and there are basically 4 main screen sizes that people usually do media queries off of. So is it best practice to kind of go with Kai's suggestion of just doing like a default styling and then adding like the other 3 for like cell phone, tablet, and then maybe like a larger screen resolution or something else?
Yeah, I'll definitely share kind of what my experience has been with that. So first of all, it really depends on your users, right? Everything we do depends on our users. Companies I've worked for has done a little bit of research. So we actually had data on, what percentage of our customers were using phones, what percentages of our customers were using laptops. And this is information you can actually get, and it helps you better determine where to focus your efforts, okay? So I've seen a couple different things. I think typically at minimum, there's gonna be a small phones, medium phones, medium laptop, right? These widths are often determined by your company, right? You can also look up articles like what are good kind of pixel widths for these different things. Small phones is usually going to be about 400 pixels, give or take. Maybe we go to like 700. Maybe that's more like iPad. Can you hear the car alarm? Sorry, it stopped. Medium laptop, maybe that's like, I don't know, I'm making this up. And then our XL is going to be anything above that, right? So your company is going to probably have these determined already, but you can also do research as to what are the most common sizes instead of just whatever I'm making up. So what I've seen is you typically want to start with either your mobile styles or your largest styles, okay? What I mean by that is kind of the way that Kai was writing his code, right? Are we starting with what do we want the phones to look like and scaling up? Or are we starting with what do we want our largest computer screens to look like and scaling down, okay? And so you're often gonna be using either min width or either max width, determining on your starting position, okay? Am I going from my phone styles, applying media queries to handle when we get larger, or the inverse of that, okay? Rana, what was your question?
Not a question. It was just going to go back to the previous question about,
Okay.
so if you're not done with that thought.
I'll come back to it, it's fine.
Okay. I was curious if it's possible to do some sort of like conditional check, like with a range to see if you're in between a min width and a max width, else you are going to change the media query to the other color or whatever. But that seems like it's pretty verbose and probably not the best way to do it.
Yeah, I am 99% sure that you can. You can look up how to include, say I want to apply these styles only between 700 and 900 pixels, right? I can do something like that where I'll say pretty much that, specify min width here and max width over there. I don't think you'll see it quite as commonly because as you said, it's a little verbose, but you can get a little more complex with your logic in your media queries if you'd like to. Yeah. All right, cool. So the way I would write this, as I said, is I would determine, okay, oops. Okay, I would determine my initial styles. Okay, go ahead and inspect this. Well, it doesn't want me to do that when I have this open. Okay, so I set body to be initially green. This is freaking out because it is not commented out. Okay. My initial styles are going to be green. Okay. Once I hit 899 pixels, that magenta takes over. Okay. This is personally the way that I like to write media queries. If you've ever heard the term mobile first, this is how we do that. Okay. Basically, the idea is develop for the smallest screen size first, okay? Noting this body here, that's our smallest screen size, applying media queries as we grow, okay? So this might be a situation of where I want that to change at a couple different breakpoints, right? I would keep kind of adding these. I would want to keep these numbers kind of consistent, right? And I would be building upon them to handle the screen size getting larger, okay? This is a situation of where we're gonna have multiple things, right? Maybe I have an H1, my font size, maybe I wanna use pixels here. We know there's other ways to do it, but I would keep kind of adding, what do I want to change? Oops. As my site grows, right? Maybe I want to specify, we're going to go from 12 to 20 to whatever, okay? All right, so this is mobile first, okay? Thinking that it is easier to add to our site instead of take away for smaller screens, right? This is another situation of where I would maybe use Flexbox, right? I would go ahead and set my Flexbox is going to be column. Maybe in my media query, I'm going to change it to row for my things to spread out. Yeah. All right. What questions do we have about this? Jasmine.
I was wondering, like, here you're just giving a quick example of changing the font size. But it seems like depending on the units we use, some things are gonna maybe like automatically be responsive. So I guess I'm getting curious about like, what are the types of things that we just give a responsive unit to versus what are the things that we're going to like hard code into each of our media queries? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. A lot of developers like to use media queries as a last resort, right? If you kind of go in with the intentions of, I'm going to use percentages and view heights and rems and flexbox and grid, you can get a lot of your responsive just in there by default, right? So maybe this is more of an afterthought, right? Where you build out most of your app, but then you start looking at it on multiple screens and you're starting to add in media queries. I think there's also situations, more so on the job, where you know for a fact that your styles on mobile versus desktop are going to be very different, right? Things like completely transforming a menu to like a full out horizontal links thing into a hamburger menu, you got to use a media query for that. So these are incredibly important for the big changes, right? And yeah, this example, probably not super helpful. anything you can use, flexible box model, giving some of that movement is good, but the bigger changes, you're going to be using media queries for sure. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah. What other questions do we have? Okay.
I guess kind of based off what you just said, like about the like a nav bar and have all your stuff laid out versus like a collapsible menu. How do you put like logic or functions? How would you call functions, I guess? So never mind. I think I'm just figuring it out in my head.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it is complicated to do that, right? Thinking about how that structure changes entirely. You can do it with CSS only, but it is quite tricky. I think another thing that's a little bit easier is how we kind of saw here, right? Where we noticed that the order of our elements kind of jumbled around, right? Media query, right? The kind of common thing that you see where you have horizontal cards laid out, maybe ideas, right? You've done this layout a lot, where you're changing that from spread out into a row to stacked into a column, right? That's kind of a major change of layout, right? There's no natural thing we can just do to make that happen. Maybe grid, there's some magic with grid. A media query is gonna help you for those big layout changes. Yeah. All right, cool. See what's left in our lesson. All right, this is just kind of a notice of a thing to make sure you don't forget. If you're using any kind of HTML boilerplate, React, I think, does this for you. Make sure that you have this meta tag included, okay? There have been moments where I've forgotten to add this and been like, why are my media queries not applying? This helps your browser kind of determine what that scaling is going to look like, okay? There's more information here if you're curious, but it's kind of just one of those things. Make sure you have it, okay? There's a couple pieces of information that it knows to kind of figure out where to determine that width, right, of whatever you put into your breakpoint, and your initial scale. So whenever you load the page, do we want to be extra zoomed in or just kind of set that to the default of 1? Just some extra information that is needed to apply these media queries. Yeah, Ethan.
I just have hopefully a quick question of like, we are having issues with our responsive design in our project, and we
Okay.
have this line included for like in our HTML,
Mhm.
but on actual mobile phones, it breaks the like landing page with all the movies. But when we do it with like the dev tools, when it's at that same size, it is working properly. So we checked to see if this was included, and it is. Is there any other way to go about like problem solving that?
So sometimes you do run into situations like that. So there are complexities going from a computer to a mobile device, right? Their internals, how they work is super different, okay? So whenever we are shrinking our screen in our browser, trying to work on our responsive or mobile devices, it's helpful, but it's not 100% match. It is important in the future, probably more on the job, to actually test these out on a real mobile device. There are simulators. Xcode has an iPhone simulator, which is slower, but it loads up the actual like hardware that an iPhone is using to give you a more accurate rendering. As far as your question though, I'm not sure. I'd have to look at your code, but if you send it to me, I'm happy to do that. See if anything jumps out.
Awesome. Great, Hannah. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, Ches, looks like you posted in the chat. Perfect. Thank you. Could you tag me in that later?
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. So I will say that debugging these issues can be a little challenging because you have to run it up on a phone and you have your inspector somewhere else. But it can definitely happen. Yeah. All right. So for the rest of class, we have some practice. Okay. This is not in React, but it shouldn't matter, right? Your media queries are going to look the same, right? You're going to be, of course, putting them into your components. That's going to be different where you're storing your code, but there isn't really a huge difference in media queries in React versus anywhere else. There are different ways to write CSS in React, of course, but just kind of our plain media queries that we're starting with, it's going to look the same. Okay. All right, so we have a couple challenges for you. Okay, so whenever we start, you'll want to go to this repo here. Okay, make sure you read the directions because you're not going to have to do npm install or start or any of that stuff. We're stripping away. We're going back to basics, really just HTML and CSS file here. Just so you can practice recreating some comps yourself. Okay, so I think they're pretty much just some empty HTML files, okay, just to kind of get you started. Everything's sort of connected and hooked up. But if you look at the README, this is going to be what you are trying to create. Some lovely boxes, okay? So the first one, you can see we've got boxes labeled ABC, and you can see that that layout changes a bit, okay, just a little bit. Across our different devices. So these examples are only really dealing with 3 different sizes. That's the kind of common start where we've got a phone, a tablet, and a desktop, okay? There's a second challenge, which is a little bit different. We've got a header and a footer, okay? So you can sort of practice moving around those elements, probably using Grid and Fluxbox for most of this, okay? Right, so that's what we're going to be doing with the rest of class time. I am going to give you the option to be in a group or work on this by yourself. Okay, so I think the best way to do this is I'm going to open a bunch of random breakout rooms. If you decide you want to just work on it by yourself, just stay in the main room. Yeah. I guess I'll try to open a couple blank empty rooms too. So if you have questions for me, we can maybe go into them. We'll play around with that, okay? Let's go ahead and take a POM first before we get into this. Let's do probably a good 10 minutes because we have the time. So go get up and stretch. We'll come back at 21 after.